Well, don't all jump up at once. How are we doing? Fine. We all kind of tired? Yeah. The grind of the semester's getting to us. Yeah. You guys need to discover coffee, or in my case, espresso.
Yeah, but then you have to get up earlier.
Earlier to get it? Yes, but you're far more efficient once you have it and start imbibing. Um, yeah, because this is 3 shots of espresso and steamed milk. It's like the only time I actually drink milk is as a dilution uh, material for my coffee. So anyway, all right. Well, let's get to it. So we were doing Scratch stuff last time, and um, the posted the actual assignment for um, the first Scratch project. So basically, what all does it need to have? Let's remind ourselves.
You need like a fade.
Yeah, need a fade. I'm going to show you guys a trick for how to do that. That's kind of clever. Um,
But
you need animation, meaning stuff has to move around. Okay. You need some sort of logo, which you can either make as a separate image, like in Photoshop or something, and then load it in, or you can sort of build one by using different sprites that are already there in Scratch, so like the letters and stuff. Um, there should be some sound, and what else did I say? Sound, motion, logo, fade. What was the fifth thing? Oh, it needs to not look like crap. Yeah, okay. So the polish standard. Okay, so the fade is something where, if we think about it, we can actually be kind of clever. So I wanted to show you kind of a cool trick for how to do this. So let's go to Scratch, and um, we were working on this, the intro demo. Okay, so here's what we had so far. Let me delete that. And so here's what we had so far. Nothing particularly special, but all right, whatever. Okay, so let's make it so that it fades to a solid color. And since we've got a background of white, in this case, why don't we just fade to white? You can fade to any color you want, obviously. I don't really care about that. Um, I mean, it's going to be the same kind of idea either way. So pick a color based on whatever aesthetic you're already using with your art, with your background. Like pick something that's going to match the look you're going for. Um, all right. So in this case, let's do white. There's a couple ways that we can do a fade, right? So one of the ways we can make everything fade out is to make everything fade out. By which I mean, and I'm not trying to be silly when I say that, by which I mean I could make all of the letters that are on the screen actually kind of disappear. Okay. Uh, and the way I can do that is let me put in a repeat loop, and under looks, we've got a couple of little things here. So there's change color effect by a number, but if you click on the little arrow, then you can see there's a bunch of different effects that you can change. And one of them is called the ghost effect. Okay. And the ghost effect is exactly what we'll use to do fading in and out. If you partially fade something, then that's how you can make it sort of look transparent. So if you, I don't know, want an actual ghost, then that's how you can get that effect. All right, so let me just say here, set ghost effect to 0. Okay, so let me run the program and let's see what happens. Okay, nothing happened. So, all right, so what's ghost effect 0 mean? 0% transparent, which means 100% visible. So that's why nothing actually happened. But if I change this to, say, 50, okay, you see how the C is sort of partly transparent now? Yeah? Okay, so if I made that 100, then it would disappear entirely. Okay, now two things I need to do is if I'm going to set the effect, if I'm going to change the effect, I better have it be set the effect to the correct value at the beginning. In this case, I want it to be solid when the program starts. Okay, but I could use this trick equally well to make something fade in and then when it's finished, then also fade back out. Yeah, cool. Well, right. Okay, so that's about what we were about to do. Um, so Cole's point is right there. I made an instantaneous fade by 50, right? But how do I make it actually sort of look like it's fading out? Well, I would want to change by a smaller quantity and repeat that over time so that it goes from 100% visible to 90 to 80 to 7, right? And then it looks like it's fading out of view. Okay, which is why I put the repeat loop up here so I've got that ready to go. All right, so if I put a repeat and then I say set the, or sorry, not set, but change the ghost effect by, let's say 10. All right, so let's see what that does. Okay, so it faded out, but it faded out really quickly. Okay, which maybe is what you're going for, right? You can have a fast fade, you can have a slow fade. So how can we make it a little slower? Hmm? Okay, we could put a weight in there, right, of some small number like a tenth of a second or something. Okay, that would work. The other thing we could do is make the increment by which we change it a little bit smaller. Oops. And therefore have to repeat it more times. Okay, so let's see what that version does. And we, of course, can combine the two, so I might want to also put a weight in here. And then I can tune. All right, how did that look to you guys? Too slow, too fast, just right? What do you think? Yeah, good. Okay, but yes, you could also put in a very short delay, like a tenth of a second kind of thing. Um, and it would, you know, oh, I'm sorry, guys, online. I never went back to Chrome. Yeah, they're looking at the, my stream will return shortly. I'm the world's worst streamer. Um, yeah, okay, sorry, guys. So, yeah, so what I was talking about here is I've got uh, the repeat loop of changing the ghost effect, and then to make sure that the object is solid and visible when the program starts, I've got the thing up at the top. Okay, so that works perfectly well. But what about if I want to make everything fade out? Right, we just did it for the first letter C. So what do I need to do? I'd have to put basically copy this code to all of them. Okay, yeah, bingo. That's the better way to do it. Okay, so one an obvious way to do it would be to just take what we did for the first letter C and copy and apply that sort of idea to every other sprite. Now, in this case, there's only 3 sprites on the screen, so it's not that onerous to do that, okay? But what would be better is to make something else, like what about if we had 50 sprites on the screen? Not what we want, right? Do you want to have to copy this 50 times? I mean, you don't want to. You could. Okay, so instead, what we'll do is rather than making everything else fade out, we'll make one thing fade in front of it all, and it'll look like everything else is fading out. Okay, and then we only have one object that's doing the fading, right? So you guys see how brilliant this is? Yeah? Okay, so what I'm going to do first is, well, let me just get rid of what we got here. And now that the thing is solid again, I can get rid of that because we're not going to mess with how the letter looks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another sprite. Oops, and I don't want to pick one. I want to actually paint this one. Okay, so if you paint a sprite, you basically get like uh, a blank palette, and it's a little hard to see, but there is actually a very fine grid on there. It's just that you can't see it on the projector. It's there if you do it on your computer. And the shape of this thing, that sort of white bounding box, is the shape and size of the entire screen in Scratch. Okay, so if you wanted to make a character, right, if you use that entire palette, then it's going to take up the entire screen, unless you reduce its size by using uh, the set size thing. Okay, and in our case, that's exactly what we want. Okay, so I'm going to make a sprite that is basically just a big white box, and then at the start of the program, I'll make it invisible. And at the end of the program, when we want to do the fade, I'll have it fade in front of all the other objects, and it'll make all of them look like they're fading out. Okay, so you see kind of how the trick's going to work? All right, now, it does look on the projector like I already have a full white screen, but it's not. It's actually a transparent, and it's just, you're not seeing the grid. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my fill here. Um, let's see, I want solid white. That's right. Okay. Um, okay, so saturation 0, brightness 100. Okay, so that gives me a fill, and then I'm just going to use the rectangle tool here to make a rectangle, and then I can kind of um, snap it to the edges. Okay, and then on it, I can, if I select it again, oops, need the mouse pointer. You see how it has this black outline? Well, let's do the same thing. I want a white outline so that I just have a solid white rectangle. Okay, now on my in my palette, so you see it's there, and now it's in front of everything. But if I move it, then it kind of isn't covering things up. All right, so if I go to the code here, the first things I want to do is when this is clicked, I need to tell this sprite to hide or to be invisible. So what I'm going to do is immediately set the ghost effect to 100. The other thing I want to do is I want to move this thing here it is. I want it centered on the screen, right? Not at some random coordinate. All right, so if I run that little piece of code, then two things have happened. It's centered on the screen, so there's not going to be any weird bordering issues, and it's fully transparent. Okay, good? All right, so now how do I make it fade in? Well, how did I make the other stuff fade out? What was the trick? Yeah, okay. So when we did this for the letters, we started them at 0 and we ramped them up to 100 and we had some sort of increment that we were looping over. Well, let's just do the same thing here, except it'll be sort of the opposite direction. All right, so I need a loop and I need to make it change the ghost effect by, in this case, I'll be changing it not by 1, but by -1, because 100 corresponds to 100% transparent, 0 to fully opaque, and I want to go from transparent to opaque, which will make everything else look like it's going the other direction. Okay? All right, now, right now, when would this fade happen based on what I've got in my code? Huh? This would happen exactly when I started the program. Okay? Do I want the fade to happen when the program starts? Not in this case. So when do I want it to happen? After the C and the S and stuff have made it to their correct positions. When does that happen? Like, we could figure out how many seconds it is and put a weight in. Okay, but there's a smarter way to do it, um, which is that we separate these two pieces of code out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this out like so. And right now, that repeat loop is sort of an unattached, it's an orphan piece of code because there's nothing, it's not attached to a start block of any type. Okay, so it will never run based on how I have it now. Now, the go to the center and set the ghost effect to 100, those will happen because they're attached to the when green flag checked, which is when the program starts. Okay, so what other ways can I trigger a piece of code to execute other than when green flag checked, right? That's the question. So let's go to events and see what we've got. So the pieces of code that we're looking for here are the sort of top hat dudes, okay, which are all in the events category. One of them is, of course, when green flag clicked, right? Namely, to start the program. But we've also got stuff like when a particular key on the keyboard is pressed, when that sprite is clicked. So I think I used that in the cheesy poof clickers thing. When the backdrop switches to something, when loudness is bigger than 10, um, when I receive a message. Okay, so of all of those things, which one do you think is going to be relevant to our problem here? Okay, so just kind of look at what you got in front of you, and let's use our noodles a little bit. Like your sweatshirt. Yeah, I mean, maybe not with the coffee stain part, but mm, yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Fight, 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 fight. BG, Scratchy Show. Yeah, Cole. Idea?
Is there a way to get it to be like when Sprite 1 reaches 0, 0?
Um, not directly. Or, okay, not in this language, right? But we could sort of do something that has the same effect of that. Okay. Other idea?
You can have it broadcast a message, and whenever you receive a message,
Exactly. That's going to be the way to do it. You have the C uh, or the S or the other C, because in this case, when do they get to their final destination?
same time.
They all get there at the same time. So it doesn't matter if which of the three letters broadcasts the message. We only need one of them to broadcast it because they all get there at the same time. Okay. So yeah, so that's what we'll do. We'll have one of the letters broadcast, hey, I'm where I need to be, and then we'll have the fade sprite basically sitting there saying, waiting to receive that message. And when it does, that will trigger it to do its action. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, good. All right, so let's go over to the first letter C, and let's go down here. And um, actually, in this case, they all get to the destination at the same time, but the first letter C has an extra 1 second worth of stuff, right? Because I made it do that little pop. So let's put the message on this guy so that we get to see the pop effect before we start fading. Okay. Um, all right. And so that's exactly what I want to do. I want to broadcast a message. Okay, now if I just by default, there's message one, but I'm going to make a new message here, and I'm going to call it, say, start fade. You can have as many different messages as you want, and they can, of course, have whatever names that you want. And so, like, let's say that I had two different messages, start fade and end fade, or start fade and start game, or whatever, right? You got to make sure that you're broadcasting the correct message and also waiting to receive the correct message. Okay. All right. So it will broadcast the message start fade. And then on the fade dude, we'll have our fade stuff say start when I receive start fade. Okay. So does that kind of make sense? Sure. The C. Okay. So all I added was this little bit. Let me zoom in a little bit. When I broadcast start fade, and then the other one will trigger when it receives the message. Okay. All right. Does that kind of that idea make sense? Yeah. Now, one other thing, the reason that I only put this on one of the letters is because what would happen if I transmitted the start fade message 3 times? Well, it might start fading and then get the message and start fading, right? So, like, I don't want to over trigger it in this case. If you're making a game, then maybe you do, but um, like maybe when you click on the Cheesy Poofs ball, right? Every time you click on it, it says cheese poofs. Well, so what happens if I click on it really quickly? Then what might it do? Cheese poofs, right? It could say I can't layer sounds on top of itself with I only have one voice, sadly. Can you imagine if we all had like two mouths that could each speak independently? Wouldn't that be kind of cool? Huh? I was gonna say, what nightmare am I? Am I sleeping still? Right. Okay, so let's go over to the fade sprite, and when I receive it, start fading. All right, so let's see how it works. Okay, and watch, by the way, that little chunk of code. You see how it's sort of lit up, right? So when it got triggered, it lit up, and you could see that it was actually running. That's really handy for debugging this, to make sure that that stuff looks good. And then if we rerun it, what's going to happen? Looks pretty good. Yeah. So there's the magic fade trick. You don't make everything fade out, you make something else fade in. Okay, now there is one little wrinkle here. What happens if you put your fade thing in and then you say, oh, you know what? I want to add a few more sprites and doctor up some other things, right? So the way that the sprites work on the screen uh, is imagine that they're all like little pieces of paper, okay? And you can move those little pieces of paper around, but pieces of paper can be layered on top of each other. And by default, the order that they're layered in is the order you create them in. Okay, so what happens if I create a bunch of sprites after I put in this fade sprite? They're going to be on top of the fade sprite and it won't look like they're fading out. Okay, so how do I fix this? Well, under looks, we've got this stuff right here. go to the front layer or go forward one layer. You can also go to the back layer, okay? And then, of course, you could also go backwards a layer or however many layers. Okay, so what's the order of the layers here? What's the very bottom layer, and it will always be the very bottom layer, and you can never change that? The backdrop. That makes sense, right? So that's like the table. So if you send a sprite to the back layer, you're going to be basically putting it behind everything except, of course, the backdrop. Okay, and then all the other sprites are layered, however many there are. Um, and so if you add a whole bunch of sprites after you've put something in, what you might need to do is move. Well, in our case, where should the fade sprite be? He should go to the front layer, which is on top of everything else. Okay, and this way, it doesn't matter how many things you create and when. Hit the fade sprite will always be at the very top, and hence everything behind it will fade. Now, you might not want that to be the case. So you might want like some sprites to be above the fade and other sprites to be below the fade. That's up to your artistic license. Okay. But this is how you would sort of fix it is just make sure that it's in the appropriate layer so that the stuff you want to be on top of it is on top of it and the stuff you want below it is below it. Make sense? Cole?
Is all that stuff like multiple sprites for all the letters and stuff? Or
Yeah.
is one sprite like one page?
What do you mean one page?
Like, is a sprite a layer or is a
Yes.
sprite a.
A sprite lives on a layer. Okay. So multiple sprites can be on the same layer.
Okay.
But when you create them, it defaults to putting them in layers based on the order that you create them. Okay. So how many of you guys have used Photoshop for anything? Right? Photoshop has layers, same idea. Right? You can move things forwards and backwards in the layers, and that's up to you to decide where you want them. The one caveat, of course, is who is always at the very, very bottom? The backdrop, and you can't change that. Okay. Um, yeah. So yeah, if you wanted to do something like that, right, you just have to have a whole bunch of sprites and put them on whatever layers they need to be on to make it look right. Where look right is um, that's the artistic part of this decision, right? You decide how you want to make them look, and then do that. Um, yeah. Okay. So Uh, now there are some other effects besides the ghost effect that you guys can do some kind of trippy stuff with. And maybe play with that. You can make stuff pixelate, make it look like 8-bit Mario or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of other effects that are built in and you can kind of play around with. Okay, so does that kind of make sense for the fade trick? So what did this depend on? Well, the fading part wasn't so hard. But what we had to sort of realize was also how to do the messaging, right? And that the messaging you can use for a whole bunch of other cool things. So if, for example, you're making a full-blown video game with this, right, the messaging is going to be really important because that's how you're going to do stuff like, well, like let's say my cheesy poof clickers thing. When you clicked on the Cartman's mom, it sent a message to something else that said, hey, you just increased the number of moms by whatever, right? And so I had the different sprites communicating with each other by means of a bunch of messaging. Okay. Okay. Gucci, Prada. All right. So let me make a new project just to show something a little different. And okay, so let me save that and let's make something new. All right, and let me get rid of the stupid cat. Hmm? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a, what I want to show you guys is how clones work. So let me create a sprite, and I'm going to choose to use this ball sprite. Okay, fine. Um, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it move around, kind of randomly. Doesn't really matter which way it goes. Um, so let's see. So under events, one green flag clicked. I'm going to make it start to move around. I'm going to have it, let's say, go to a random position, point in a random direction, and let's see, I need a random direction. So I've got the random number generator here. Okay, so 0 to 360 would be some random direction. All right, now if I run this, it probably doesn't look like it's changing which way it's facing, but can you guys see that it is? And how do you tell? You see where the little highlight is? That normally is on the top right, okay? So if the highlight is not at the top right, then the sprite has been rotated so it faces a different direction, okay? Good? All right, so now I want to make this thing move around. Well, how could I make it move? How do we make the C and stuff move? Let me go back to the motion tab so you guys can see the different options. Okay, so what options did I have here? Right, I can change the X and the Y coordinate. I can also move a certain number of steps, and in this case, that's the one I'm going to choose to use. All right, so I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to make it for this sprite only. And then I'm going to set speed to a random number between, say, 1 and 5. I'm just making something up. Okay, then under control, I'm going to put a forever loop, and I'm going to say move how many steps, move speed steps, and under motion, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say if on edge bounce. That way, if it hits the edge of the screen, it will calculate basically how to make the thing bounce. All right, so let's run this and see what happens. Okay. All right, so 1 to 5 maybe is a little bit too slow. Let's change this to like 4 to 5, maybe 4 to 8 or something, and let's see how it goes here. It's kind of cool, right? All right. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make clones of this object. Okay, so um, what a clone is basically I've made the template, sort of uh, what the object ball should look like, and then I can have instances of that object. Okay, so this is something that we do in object-oriented programming, where you make a class and you have an object that's a member of that class. So I can say the general category of ball should look and behave roughly like this, but then I could have ball one, ball two, ball three, and so on, that each are instances of that class. Now, why did I make the speed a variable local to the sprite instead of a global variable? Well, if I clone this thing and it has a local variable, each clone gets its own copy of that variable, and they can all be different values. So if I make 5 balls here, they could each have their own speed. Makes sense. Okay. If I wanted them all to go the same speed, then I would probably use a global variable. But for sake of demonstration, I'm going to make them be able to move differing speeds. Okay, so there's two things I need to add. The first is I need under events, uh, actually it's under control. When I start as a clone, I'm going to put this stuff here. Okay. Now, if I do that, nothing will look different because I never created any clones. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to make a loop. Let me make 10 clones. Okay. And I'm going to do um, create a clone of myself. Okay. So what that's going to do is the original, and then, sorry, let me add one other little thing here. I'll hide it. Okay, so the original ball will create 10 copies of itself, but it will be invisible. Okay, I've hidden it. And then what I will see, and I need to put the show on the clone creator. What I will see is basically 10 balls magically appear and start moving. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so let's run it and see what happens. Okay, are they all moving the same speed? Look carefully. No, there's a variation, right? And that makes sense because what did I set the speeds to? Random numbers between 4 and 8. Okay. 4 and 8 are relatively close, but what about if I did something ridiculous like 4 and 10 or 2 and 10? So let me exaggerate it. Right. So I've got some moving really fast and other moving really slow, and they're moving in sort of random directions. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Now, let me do a couple of other things to just to make it look cool. Under looks, I'm going to say set the color effect to a random number between 0 and 100. All right, so now let's see it. Okay, so the color effect basically, um, changes the color, the sort of appearance of it. So this would be kind of like in Photoshop or like in your iPhone's camera app or something like that. You can take a picture and then you can kind of adjust the color palette a little bit. So like you could make it black and white, or you can make it a sepia tone where it's black and white, but it's kind of got that sort of orangish yellow tint to it that makes it look old fashioned or something. Yeah, right. Well, you can do that sort of thing. Uh, Here, I've deliberately picked sort of ridiculous amounts of coloration. So I've got the original ball that's sort of floating around there that doesn't have much coloration, but then all the others have some random colorization effect. And so it just spices it up so they don't all look the same.
Why did they find it mine actually close to the same
Uh,
color? It's not like red.
oh, okay. The reason it's not, you don't have the entire rainbow worth of colors here is because the original ball was yellow, right? And so the if you colorize a yellow thing, that yellow is already there, and you can't change that. Okay, now one thing I could do is, so if I look at the ball's costumes, you'll notice there's a bunch more colors. So what I could do instead is I also could switch to um, um, actually, this is really cool. Let me go into the costumes and let me change the names of the costumes to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The reason I did that is because then I can switch to costume number random between 1 and 5. Okay. And then I get a much bigger variety of colors because the color effect is layering on top of a random one of those costumes. And the costumes, I had a yellow one, a purple one, a green one, and whatever, right? So I get a wider variety of different colors. Okay. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
Other stuff in the screen.
What do you mean?
Like some of the other stuff.
Um, that's a good question. Go to random position, show, set speed to pick random, forever move speed steps. I'm not sure.
Mine's just messed up. On the other one, I couldn't put two into the same one.
Huh.
Like and. I
Well,
couldn't.
just stop it and start it again.
No,
Yeah. If you add code while the thing's running, it doesn't magically start running it. Right? Okay. All right. So we got lots of bouncing cats going on here. Did you do balls or cats or balls? Okay. uh, whatever, right? Doesn't really matter. Now, I could do all sorts of other cool randomization things. So I could make each ball a different size and randomize that. I could adjust the speeds a little bit more, right? So there's all kinds of stuff I could do. One thing I'm going to do just to spice this up is, what about if I click on one of these things? Could I do something that depends on the click? Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's go to sensing and let's see what we have. Okay. Um, I can tell yes or no whether or not the mouse pointer is touching an object. I can also check to see whether the mouse is being clicked at that moment. Okay, so that's mouse down, just means that your finger is down. Um, and if I go to events, I've got when this sprite is clicked. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually not going to use the when the sprite is clicked. I'm going to use a control, and I'm going to do an if-then kind of thing. So I'm going to say if the mouse pointer is, so if the sprite is touching the mouse pointer, that means the mouse pointer is touching the sprite, right? Same thing, okay? And mouse down, and I want both things to be true, so I'm going to use an and operator. Okay, so what I'm checking here is the mouse both on top of my sprite and currently being clicked? Okay, so I'm going to put that inside the loop. And so the loop, it's going to check every time it repeats, hey, am I being clicked on? Hey, am I being clicked on? Hey, am I being clicked on? Okay, what do I want it to do if it gets clicked on? Well, that's up to me. What do you guys want to do? I don't know. Well, okay, let's make it delete. Well, let me just do that to start with. Let me just say delete this clone. Okay, so now watch what'll happen. Right, now they're all gone. Okay, they're not hidden, they literally got deleted. Okay, so they no longer exist. Nope, only if you restart the program. Right? Okay, so that's fine. But what I could do, for example, is, well, let me just do it this way. Uh, Move you here. Okay. All right, so now what's going to happen if I click on something? I'm going to delete it, but two more got created. Right, so if I keep this game going, right, and how could I make this a little bit ridiculous? Right, so for each one I get rid of, five more come back. Right, and now it's starting to get a little ridiculous. Okay, but you could do something like uh, I made a sort of version of this once as a demo where if one ball hit another ball, well, I did that with the COVID thing in the spring. But if one ball hits another ball, then they delete and like five more get created that are a little bit smaller. Okay, and so what I was doing was sort of simulating like uh, imagine that these are uranium atoms, and I've got like little neutrons flying around. What happens when a neutron's going the right speed and hits a uranium atom? Huh? Yeah, well, that's if it keeps going. But if I have a single uranium atom and a single neutron, and the neutrons go on the right speed, which is between some range, okay, then it hits the uranium atom. Uranium atom absorbs it, and that makes it unstable, and it splits. And then you get like two smaller atoms. You get some energy released, and also like three more neutrons. Okay, so what makes it a chain reaction is if those three neutrons then go on to hit other uranium atoms. Yeah? Because then you've got three neutrons. If they hit three different uranium atoms that split, now what? Now what? You've got how many neutrons flying around? Nine neutrons. And then 27 neutrons. This is how a nuclear weapon works, right? Is over the period of like a thousandth of a second, you go from like a bunch of neutrons to like a gajillion neutrons. And a bunch of energy gets released all at once, and big bada boom. Um, well, okay, I should rephrase. That's how a nuclear fission weapon works. Nuclear fusion weapon's a little different, but they start with a nuclear fission weapon. That starts the bang. Okay. Um, anyway, so I could do something like this where when two of them run into each other, it splits or whatever and creates some various clones. And let me just we're almost out of time here. Let me go back to um, in the spring. Um, to simulate this, okay, I made a COVID-19 simulator, right? So my idea here was uh, that there's some sort of number of balls, all representing people, moving around. And how did I start this? Well, I said, okay, we've got, say, 100 people or 50 or whatever, and I'll start with initially one infected guy. And the infected one is yellow in this case. So what happens when an infected one hits something? There's a certain probability that it transmits the infection to the other ball, and if it's infected, it changes color. And then what happens after you're infected? What happens over time if you're infected? Huh? Well, you could die, right? But eventually you get better, and that's represented in pink. Huh? Well, yeah, yeah. So you would be pink if you were immune or recovered. Um, and the fact that you see the balls are kind of tweaking out a little bit, that's a bug that I never quite fixed. Um, so the big red line there, what I was going for was we were adding basically like a quarantine type mechanic, meaning that if a ball finds itself infected, then it gets quarantined by being teleported over into the red zone. And the little wall in between means that other non infected things aren't going to be able to run into it because they're in separate little areas. That was the idea. Um, I mean, I do have some bugs, right? Because you see how the they kind of tweak out a little bit when they're running into things, and that was just because of the way I did um, stuff. So yeah, so in this case, I had sort of a random probability that the ball would either die or recover, and if it died, it got deleted. But I kept track of the numbers of infected, susceptible, recovered, dead, and we were sort of trying to make. You guys probably saw models like this in the spring on news articles and stuff simulating this. So we were just saying, let's use Scratch to kind of make one of these things. So anyway, okay, cool. I will see you guys on Friday. Huh?